Amy Carney. I am the Deputy Director here at B.E.S.T, and I am excited to be with two experts today talking about navigating the transgender landscape in our schools. Today, joining me is Vernadette Broyles. She is the President, General Counsel, and founder of Child and Parental Rights Campaign Incorporated. She's an experienced family law litigator and guardian ad litem, representing the best interests of children in court, and has been an advocate for student privacy, parental rights, and Title IX protections in our public schools. Also joining us is Joel Thorton. He is a Chief Operations Officer and Litigation Counsel for Child and Parental Rights Campaign Incorporated. Joel has also served as Chief of Staff to the State School Superintendent of Georgia, where he worked on a variety of legislative initiatives and educational policies and projects in the county and Georgia public schools. So thank you both for joining me here today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Amy.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This is such an important topic. And most importantly, I forgot to mention that both of you are parents to 2 children each, right? So I think that's our most important work, right, that we do in this world. So thank you for joining us here at B.E.S.T today to help us navigate this transgender landscape in our schools. I know Child and Parental Rights Campaign is a nonprofit public interest law firm founded to defend parental rights to shield their children from the impacts of gender identity theology or ideology. They think it's theology, right? Ideology. So one of the most recent emerging developments in schools across the nation is children identifying as transgender or gender non-conforming. Vernadette, why is this happening, and are schools to blame?
Well, schools are certainly a big part of the social contagion of this manifestation. Why is this happening? Well, there had been individuals identifying as something other than biological sex for many years. However, it was always an extremely rare phenomenon in the 0.0 something percentage of the population. But under the Obama administration, this thing metastasized. It really broke out into our culture and across our schools, because there were activists in the Department of Education that wanted to push what is essentially an ideology onto unsuspecting school children. And they issued guidance in particular in 2016 that had the effect of redefining sex under Title IX. Title IX is the federal law that prohibits sex discrimination in schools. Parents, understand what Title IX does. It protects girls' sports. It protects girls' rights to equal education in school and all children. Well, the Department of Education under President Obama sought to redefine sex in Title IX and to cause it to include gender identity. And so that guidance that they sent out to schools across the nation then instigated schools changing their bathroom access policies, changing their sports policies, and seeking to treat children as if they actually were the gender that they proclaimed themselves to be. This created tremendous confusion across the nation and lots of litigation. But that had the result of just sort of releasing the beast. And so now what we're seeing, Amy, and parents, is what at least one excellent researcher has called a sociological, a contagion, where now we're looking at some school systems that it could be 5%, as much as even 10% in some areas, of kids sort of suddenly when they hit puberty, around puberty or shortly after, just suddenly proclaiming them to be something other than the biological sex. And what's really interesting, Amy, is that the majority of it is now girls. And just as we have all seen girls in our generation and in the recent generations, it seems like one generation after the other, girls have seemed to be more vulnerable to these social contagions, whether it's bulimia or anorexia, where you believe you're fat, where you're underweight, and you look in the mirror and you see an overweight person, but you're actually very thin, or then cutting. And now it appears to be identifying as something other than what your body actually is. So this social contagion, we know, has been born largely through the internet and social media. That's another reason why we're all of a sudden seeing this just blooming and blossoming and catching on like wildfire. And the iPhone there's a real strong correlation with the advent of the iPhone, social media in your hand constantly. And schools are now a huge part of affirming and endorsing and proselytizing, evangelizing this belief system that in our view is really attacking the fundamental nature of womanhood, and biological reality.
Yes, I mean, I've heard from many parents. I've met many parents. I'm in Arizona who have told me that it's their middle school GSA club, the Gender Sexuality Alliance club, that led their daughter into transgenderism, and they are ashamed and they're upset and they're beside themselves and they don't know what in the world to do now. And so what can parents do to push back on these clubs or these ideologies that are being presented to young students in schools?
Well, absolutely. So the good news that I have for parents is that it is not inevitable that your child or your family has to succumb to the social contagion. Whenever I talk about this with parents, there's a whole variety of things that you can and should do, and you have the authority to do. Number one is to know your identity. In order for us to protect our children from an identity crisis, we need to come out of our own identity crisis, where we need to recognize we are the parents of this child. We're not mere, daycare, workers or night shift workers. We're their parents. And that means, it means authority. We have been given the authority by law, and many of us believe by God and nature itself, to guard the well-being of this child and to guide their development. So number one, know your identity. And secondly, know your rights under the law. There in Arizona, you all have actually a very robust Parental Bill of Rights. And I was hoping, while Joe talks in a second, to look up the actual site for that so you can look it up for yourself. The Arizona Bill of Rights entitles you as parents to direct every aspect of your child's upbringing, their education, their religious training. And of course, this ideology very much impacts on their religious belief systems and training, their medical care and their mental health care. And of course, many of these interventions that teachers are attempting to do to transition children at school, that is a mental health intervention. All of these areas of life, you are entitled and authorized in law to direct those. Thirdly, know what's going on at your school. Demand to know what are the list of clubs that are authorized to operate in your school. Demand to know the list of all third parties that are entitled to operate in your school, particularly any psychologist, any clinics, any medical care they offer, any mental health care that they offer. You want to know the list of individuals that could potentially be interfacing with your child. And if they give you pushback, then you push back even harder. That's a flag. Fourthly, we're finding across the nation that these GSA clubs, and they're called different things. They used to be the Gay Straight Alliance. They're now called the Gender and Sexualities Alliance, I believe. They are the canary in the coal mine. Look up if you have a GSA club and how active they are. If they're very active and they have a teacher sponsor that's involved, and particularly if it's an administrator sponsor, then you want to be very much on guard. And then the next thing is, you want to make it perfectly clear. I would absolutely put it in writing. Prepare a letter that makes clear what your child is authorized to do and what he or she is not. And in particular, what clubs he or she is allowed to participate in. Particularly if you don't want your child involved in the GSA or any other club, then expressly, they are not permitted. I do not consent to them participating in either of these clubs. If you have a receptive, responsive principal, assistant principal, you send it to them, the superintendent, and obviously keep a copy. If you're having difficulty in pushback, and Amy, you stop me when I need to, but I want to make sure I get this in. If you're getting pushback, that's clearly a sign. I would CC your family attorney, or find a local education attorney, put them on some sort of small retainer, couple $1,000 retainer, whatever, or a local nonprofit who perhaps provides legal assistance, and CC an attorney. That will get your attention. And then finally,
Awesome.
I'll have to say this last thing, Amy, forgive me. The most important thing is that you inoculate your child by you sitting down with your child and you conversing with him or her before, and say, you know, honey, before they ever interact with someone who may be trying to pull them in and suck them, evangelize them into this belief system. You tell them what it's all about. You make it such that it is old news by the time they hear someone talking about being born in the wrong body, which of course is biological, it's unscientific, it's nonsense. And so that they have enough sense, or if any teacher were to tell them, don't tell your parents about this, that, or the other, don't tell your parents about what we're talking about, that they are sensitized to recognize those words as stranger danger, and that they will immediately come and talk to you about it.
That's so good. So good. Thank you. That's great actionable tips. Okay, Joel, I know you all, I have it right here, created Navigating the Transgender Landscape School Resource Guide. Can you tell us more about this? Why did you create it? What is your hope through creating this guide?
Oh, absolutely, Amy. Thanks for having us on. You know, the whole point behind the guide was that we realized that a lot of school officials, principals, superintendents, school board members, they don't really understand what their rights are. They don't understand what's happening, and they're getting all their information from activist organizations who are trying to drive this conversation towards, you have to affirm these kids, you have to treat them a certain way, and you cannot discriminate against them, even at the cost of discriminating against the other kids in the school. And so we wanted to create a neutral guide that was not written with a lot of activist language, that was not written from that standpoint, but was written from common sense, medical language, and legal language to help parents, as well as superintendents, principals, counselors in schools, and school board members understand exactly what the rights are. So what we put together these 4 chapters and included sample policies and ideas on how to develop the right policies. Because when you're trying to protect only the transgender kids, you're not protecting all the other kids in a public school. When you're saying that you have to allow the transgender kid to use the bathroom of their choice, or you have to allow them to stay in a room with the sex of their choice on an overnight field trip, you're discriminating against all the other kids who are living according to their biological sex. And so that was the first thing we did. And once we got it written, we had it approved by 14 medical professionals who looked at it, analyzed the studies we were doing, gave us feedback. We listened to their feedback. We engaged their feedback into the guide and incorporated it in. And then we had it printed up and distributed. We're currently mailing it out. We've mailed it out to every principal in Georgia, every principal in Utah. We're going out next week to every principal in Florida. We're going to be going to Texas and Arizona as well, getting it in the hands of every principal so that they have this guide and access to not only this guide, but access to the PDF that we have online so that they can distribute it as far and wide as they want, saying, hey, there's a middle road here that incorporates common sense, doesn't ignore the majority of your parents, and doesn't discriminate against the transgender students. It doesn't violate Title IX to say a transgender student can use any private restroom on campus they want. That's an accommodation that's appropriate under Title IX. But to say a transgender kid has to be allowed to use whatever restroom that transgender kid wants to use, that's a violation of every other kid in that restroom's business. And it's as troubling to young boys as it is to young girls, which has been surprising to me as we've gone through this over the last 2 or 3 years and dealt with it. But I think the guide can have tremendous effect. It's written in a non-discriminatory way. It's not written as an activist paper. It's meant to be a very professional, well-researched, over 200 footnotes resource that principals, superintendents, and counselors can use.
Yeah, it's a great resource. How can we as parents order that resource? Where do we find it?
You'll find it on our website at childparentrights.org/resources. And there's a resource button on that page. When you go on the page, click on the resource button. There'll be a place where you can either order a hard copy from us. There's a minimal cost for a hard copy. We're getting back the cost of publishing the document and the cost of shipping, or you can get a PDF of it there for free. There's a link that allows you to download a electronic copy of the whole thing. The trouble is, if you go and print it out, it's going to cost you more than it would to buy a hard copy from
That's
us.
okay. It's worth it. We've ordered them here in Arizona and I highly recommend it. Joel and Bernadette, thank you so much for your time and joining us here at B.E.S.T. Everyone go on parentsknowbest.com, sign up for our emails and join us on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
So good to be with you, Amy. Thank you for the
Thank
work.
you.